In 1979, Florida released 10 million mosquito fish into lakes, ponds, and canals across the state. The goal was simple: let nature control mosquitoes instead of spraying chemicals. The fish were tiny, barely 2 inches long, and each one could eat up to 100 mosquito larvae per day. Officials called it a biological solution to a billion-dollar problem. The mosquito population would crash. Disease transmission would plummet. Everyone would celebrate Florida's environmental genius. That's not what happened. The mosquito fish ate everything except mosquitoes. They decimated native fish populations. They destroyed frog and salamander eggs. They crashed entire aquatic ecosystems. And the mosquito problem, it actually got worse because the fish ate the natural predators that were controlling mosquitoes better than the fish ever could. But here's the truly shocking part. 50 years later, these fish are still there, multiplying, spreading, destroying ecosystems across the entire southeastern United States. And removing them is now impossible because they've become so widespread that eradication would cost billions and probably fail anyway. This is the story of Florida's mosquito fish disaster, how a simple biological solution created an ecological catastrophe, and why the consequences are still getting worse 5 decades later. Let's set the scene. Slide. 1970s, Florida had a massive mosquito problem. We're not talking about a few annoying bugs at your barbecue. We're talking about clouds of mosquitoes so dense they'd block out streetlights. Swarms that would force people indoors at dusk. Tourist destinations like Miami Beach and Orlando seeing visitor numbers drop because people refused to vacation in a mosquito hellscape. But mosquitoes weren't just annoying. They were dangerous. Florida was dealing with regular outbreaks of mosquito-borne diseases. Eastern equine encephalitis, which has a 30% fatality rate in humans. St. Louis encephalitis, which causes brain inflammation and permanent neurological damage. Dog heartworm, which was devastating the state's pet population. The state was spending $50 million per year on mosquito control, aerial spraying, pesticide trucks, drain management, and it wasn't working. The chemical approach had serious problems. DDT had just been banned nationwide in 1972 after scientists discovered it was causing catastrophic environmental damage, killing birds, accumulating in fish, potentially causing cancer in humans. The replacement pesticides were expensive, had to be reapplied constantly, and mosquitoes were developing resistance. Florida needed a different solution. Enter the mosquito fish. Gambusia affinis, a tiny fish native to the southern United States that supposedly ate mosquito larvae as its primary food source. Biologists pitched it as the perfect solution: natural, self-sustaining, chemical-free mosquito control. Release them once, and they'd reproduce on their own, creating a permanent mosquito-eating army. No more spraying, no more chemicals, just let nature do the work. The idea sounded brilliant. And that's exactly why nobody questioned it until it was too late. Between 1979 and 1985, Florida's mosquito control districts released approximately 10 million mosquito fish into bodies of water across the state. Not just wild areas, they stocked residential ponds, golf course, water hazards, retention basins, drainage ditches, canals, and natural wetlands. Anywhere that had standing water got mosquito fish. The deployment was aggressive and widespread. Miami-Dade County alone released 2 million fish. Hillsborough County stocked 1.5 million. The Florida Keys got 500,000. County by county, millions of these fish were introduced into ecosystems that had never seen them before. And the early results looked promising. Some areas reported 30 to 40% reductions in mosquito larvae counts. County officials declared victory. Environmental groups praised the chemical-free approach. Other states started considering similar programs. Florida was positioned as an environmental success story, but here's what nobody was monitoring closely enough: what the fish were actually eating. Scientists assumed the fish would primarily consume mosquito larvae because that's what lab studies showed. But lab studies don't account for what happens when you put a voracious predator into a complex ecosystem with dozens of food options. Turns out, mosquito fish will eat mosquito larvae. They just prefer eating almost everything else first. Mosquito fish are opportunistic feeders. They'll eat mosquito larvae if there's nothing better available. But nothing better is doing a lot of work in that sentence, because mosquito fish consider almost everything better than mosquito larvae. Their actual diet preference, documented in multiple studies over the following decades. Native species like killifish, top minnows, and sunfish lay eggs in shallow water, exactly where mosquito fish thrive. The mosquito fish would systematically eat entire egg clutches before a single egg could hatch. Within 3 years of introduction, native fish populations in stocked waters crashed by 60 to 90%. Number 2. Amphibian eggs and tadpoles. Frogs and salamanders breed in the same shallow, still waters where mosquitoes breed. Mosquito fish devoured frog eggs on contact. They hunted tadpoles relentlessly. A 1992 study in Hillsborough County found that ponds stocked with mosquito fish had 85% fewer frogs than unstocked ponds. The frogs weren't dying of disease or habitat loss. They were being eaten before they could even become frogs. Number 3. Aquatic invertebrates. Mosquito fish ate water beetles, dragonfly nymphs, damselfly larvae, and zooplankton. This matters because, and here's the kicker, dragonfly nymphs and damselfly larvae are voracious mosquito predators. A single dragonfly nymph can eat 30 misted 50 mosquito larvae per day. By eating the dragonflies, mosquito fish were eliminating the natural predators that were controlling mosquitoes more effectively than the fish ever would. Number 4. Each other.
Mosquito fish are cannibalistic.
This sounds like it would be self-limiting, but it actually makes the population more aggressive. The fish that survive are the most aggressive feeders, the ones that ate the most eggs, larvae, and competing fish. Natural selection was creating increasingly destructive predators. And finally, number 5. Mosquito larvae. But only when literally nothing else was available. Mosquito larvae are small, fast, and hard to catch compared to stationary fish eggs or slow-moving tadpoles. The fish would eat them, but it was never their first choice. The ecological impact was immediate and severe. Within 5 years of the initial release, biologists started documenting catastrophic declines in native species. The Florida Department of Environmental Protection launched studies in 1987 to figure out what was happening. The results were damning. Mosquito fish were functioning as invasive predators. Not mosquito control, but the damage went far beyond just eating other fish. The mosquito fish triggered cascading ecological effects that nobody had anticipated because nobody had studied what happens when you introduce 10 million predators into stable ecosystems. Effect 1. The vegetation crash. When mosquito fish decimated native fish populations, they also eliminated the species that controlled algae growth. Native top minnows and killifish eat algae and keep it in check. With those species gone, algae bloomed out of control. Ponds that used to be clear turned into opaque green soup. Oxygen levels dropped. Other species suffocated. Dead zones appeared in waters that had been healthy for thousands of years. Effect 2. The frog collapse. This is where it gets genuinely catastrophic. Frogs and toads are major mosquito predators. An adult frog can eat 100 plus mosquitoes per night. By destroying frog populations through egg predation, mosquito fish eliminated one of nature's most effective mosquito control mechanisms. Mosquito populations in some areas actually increased after mosquito fish introduction because the frogs disappeared. Let me repeat that, because it's insane. Florida released mosquito-eating fish that caused mosquito populations to increase by killing the animals that actually controlled mosquitoes. Effect 3. The dragonfly collapse. Adult dragonflies are aerial predators that can eat 3,100 mosquitoes per day. They're called mosquito hawks for a reason. Dragonfly nymphs spend 1–2 years in the water before emerging as adults. And during that time, they eat hundreds of mosquito larvae. Mosquito fish devastated dragonfly populations by eating the nymphs before they could mature. Fewer dragonflies meant more mosquitoes. Effect 4. The bird decline. This took longer to notice, but by the mid-1990s, ornithologists started documenting declines in waterbird populations, herons, egrets, kingfishers, and other species that feed on small fish. The native fish these birds relied on were gone, replaced by mosquito fish that are bony, unpalatable, and not nutritionally equivalent. Some bird species changed their hunting grounds. Others saw population declines. The ecosystem wasn't adapting, it was collapsing. And the mosquito fish just kept multiplying because they had no natural predators in these new environments. Bass and larger predatory fish would occasionally eat them, but not in numbers that controlled the population. The fish were spreading into every body of water they could reach. Here's where localized problem became national disaster. Mosquito fish don't stay where you put them. Heavy rains create temporary connections between water bodies. Floods link ponds to rivers. Birds carry fish eggs on their feet from one lake to another. And humans kept intentionally spreading them because counties were still operating under the assumption that mosquito fish were helpful. By 1995, mosquito fish had spread to every southeastern state. Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, South Carolina, all reporting established populations, not just in release sites, but in natural waterways they'd colonized on their own. They'd reached Texas, California, and even parts of Nevada. Some through natural spread, some through continued intentional releases by mosquito-controlled districts that somehow hadn't gotten the memo that these fish were ecological disasters. By 2015, mosquito fish were documented in 48 states. Only Alaska and Montana remained free, and only because their waters were too cold for the fish to survive. Everywhere else had established reproducing populations that were impossible to remove. But here's what makes this truly shocking. Even after scientists published dozens of studies documenting the ecological damage, even after environmental groups begged states to stop releasing them, even after the evidence was overwhelming that mosquito fish were invasive pests, counties kept stocking them through the 2000s. California released millions in the 1990s and 2000s. Hawaii stocked them extensively, despite being warned it would devastate native species. Australia imported them in the 1980s and now considers them one of their worst invasive species. The global spread continued because the idea of biological mosquito control was so appealing that people ignored the evidence that it didn't work. So where does that leave us today in 2025? With an ecological disaster that's essentially permanent. Mosquito fish are now established in every body of water in Florida that can support them. You can't remove them because there's nowhere they haven't spread. Every pond, every canal, every lake, every retention basin has a breeding population. The fish reproduce every 28 days. A single female can produce 60–80 offspring per year. Population control is mathematically impossible. The native species they displaced are mostly gone. Some Florida top minnow and killifish populations have been eliminated entirely. Others survive only in protected areas where mosquito fish can't reach them, springs with swift currents, isolated ponds, specially managed preserves, The ecosystem that existed before 1979 is unrecoverable, and the mosquito problem still exists. Florida still spends tens of millions annually on mosquito control, still does aerial spraying, still uses pesticides. The mosquito fish didn't solve anything. They just added an additional ecological disaster on top of the original problem they were supposed to fix. Several attempts have been made to control mosquito fish populations. In the 1990s, researchers tried introducing larger predatory fish to eat mosquito fish. The predators ate native species too. They tried draining and restocking ponds. The mosquito fish returned within months from connected waterways. They tried pesticides that target mosquito fish specifically. The chemicals also killed native fish, and mosquito fish repopulated faster than natives. Every solution created new problems, because that's what happens when you try to fix an ecological disaster caused by introducing a non-native species. You can't unscramble the egg. The 5 lessons. Nobody wants to learn lesson 1. Biological control sounds better than it works. The idea of letting nature solve problems is appealing, but nature is complex, and introducing new species rarely produces simple outcomes. The mosquito fish disaster isn't unique. It's a pattern. Cane toads in Australia, Burmese pythons in the Everglades, Asian carp in the Mississippi River. Every time, the solution became worse than the original problem. Lesson 2. Lab studies don't predict ecosystem behavior. Yes, mosquito fish eat mosquito larvae in controlled laboratory settings. But labs don't have fish eggs, tadpoles, dragonfly nymphs, and 50 other more appealing food sources. Predicting ecological outcomes requires studying the species in realistic conditions, not sterile tanks. Florida didn't do that. Lesson 3. Ecosystems have existing control mechanisms that you don't see until you break them. Florida had mosquitoes, but it also had frogs, dragonflies, bats. Were native fish controlling them. These natural systems had been functioning for thousands of years. Humans assumed we could improve on them. We couldn't. We just broke what was already working. Lesson 4. Once you release a species, you can't take it back. This is irreversible. You can't round up 10 million fish and their billions of descendants spread across an entire state. The decision to release mosquito fish in 1979 is a decision Florida is stuck with forever. Every county that released them is now permanently dealing with the consequences. Lesson 5. Bureaucratic momentum is stronger than scientific evidence. Even after studies in the late 1980s and 1990s showed mosquito fish were destructive, releases continued for another 20 years in various states. Why? Because mosquito control through mosquito fish was official policy. And changing official policy requires admitting you were wrong, updating training, revising protocols, and accepting responsibility. It's easier to keep doing what you're doing and ignore the evidence. What this means for future solutions. The mosquito fish disaster should be taught in every environmental science class as a cautionary tale. But it's not, because the agencies involved don't want to draw attention to their catastrophic mistake. So the same pattern keeps repeating. Right now, there are proposals to release genetically modified mosquitoes in Florida to control mosquito populations. The modified mosquitoes produce offspring that die before reproducing, theoretically crashing wild mosquito populations. Sound familiar? Release this thing and let nature do the work is the same pitch that gave us mosquito fish. Maybe it'll work better this time. Maybe the genetic modifications function exactly as designed with no unintended consequences. Or maybe in 20 years we'll be writing about how genetically modified mosquitoes interbred with native species, spread modified genes through wild populations, and created ecological effects nobody predicted because the testing was done in labs. Not complex natural ecosystems. The pattern is identical, a biological problem. A biological solution, enthusiastic initial deployment, early promising results, delayed recognition of catastrophic unintended consequences. And by the time we realize it's a disaster, it's too late to undo. Mosquito fish are still in every body of water in Florida, still eating native species, still serving no useful purpose, still spreading. The fish that were supposed to eliminate mosquitoes 50 years ago didn't work, destroyed ecosystems instead, and will remain an unfixable problem for the next 500 years. That's what happens when simple solutions meet complex systems. The mosquitoes are still there. The native fish are gone. The ecological damage is permanent. And somehow, Florida still claims the program was partially successful because admitting total failure would require taking responsibility for one of the most catastrophic environmental decisions in state history. The shocking part isn't that it failed. The shocking part is that everyone involved saw it failing and just kept going anyway.